My name is Kyle Jensen, and I'm the Director of Writing Programs here at Arizona State University. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our first Tomorrow Talks event with Dr. Jane Goodall. Tomorrow Talks place thought leaders of today in conversations with the change makers of tomorrow, our students. Each distinguished speaker will explain how they use writing to address our most pressing challenges. This year, the series celebrates women in science. In addition to Dr. Goodall, our speakers will include Meg Lohman and ASU's own Party Smadavi. Tomorrow Talks are a student engagement initiative led by the Division of Humanities and the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at ASU, and hosted by ASU's Department of English in partnership with Macmillan Publishers. Dr. Goodall's visit is also supported by the Institute of Human Origins at ASU, which houses the Gombe Research Archives. It is my pleasure to welcome our own Dr. Ian Gilby, who is Associate Professor in the School of Human Evolution and Social Change and a research scientist in the Institute of Human Origins. He is the convener of the Gombe Research Consortium, which is comprised of scientists around the world who conduct research in and around Gombe, where he has been researching chimpanzees since 1997. Dr. Gilby will be introducing our special guest and host this morning, as well as making an important announcement about the future of the Gombe Research Archives. Ian, take it away.
Thank you, Kyle. Dr. Jane Goodall needs no introduction, but we're going to provide one anyway. From infancy, Jane was fascinated by animal behavior, and in 1957, at just 23 years old, she met the famous paleoanthropologist, Dr. Louis Leakey, and he offered her the chance to be the first person to study chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, in the wild. 3 years later, Jane traveled from England to what is now Tanzania, and equipped with only a notebook, binoculars, and determination, she ventured into the then unknown world of wild chimpanzees. Since then, she has single-handedly transformed the study of primates in the wild, changed our view of human nature, and inspired thousands of young people, especially women, to pursue careers in science. The Gombe Chimpanzee Project is ongoing and is the longest-running behavioral study of any free-ranging animal species. In the early 1970s, it became possible to routinely follow the Gombe chimpanzees wherever they went, a job which ultimately fell to a dedicated team of Tanzanian field assistants. Remarkably, these daily follows have continued essentially unchanged until the present day. The resulting data set is a unique resource that is unmatched in its depth and level of detail and is absolutely critical for understanding the complex behavior of a species that lives for over 50 years. I am very excited to announce a new partnership between the Institute of Human Origins and the Jane Goodall Institute that establishes Arizona State University as the home of this archive and the database of information that we have extracted from it. In addition to establishing IHO and ASU as a major hub of wild chimpanzee research, this partnership will provide opportunities for students and scholars in many fields, including anthropology, biology, archive studies, history of science, and women's studies. Together with JGI, we plan to leverage ASU's position as a global leader in online education to make this unique resource and the science that it generates accessible to an international audience. So if you're interested in helping, we've set up a crowdfunding campaign to raise funds for safe and secure storage for this priceless archive. For information, please visit pitchfunder.asufoundation.org. Now, of course, Dr. Goodall's work extends far beyond Gombe. Since the late 1980s, Jane has been an advocate for environmental and humanitarian causes, speaking out and shaping issues such as captive animal welfare, conservation, climate change, human rights, biodiversity loss, and more. Author of many books for adults and children and featured in countless documentaries and articles, Jane has reached millions around the world with her lectures, podcasts, and writings. She is a UN Messenger of Peace, a Dame of the British Empire, and has received many other distinguished honors, too many to list. It is my pleasure and honor to welcome her to what promises to be an inspiring and uplifting discussion about the origins and role of hope in a time when we need it more than ever. Today, Dr. Goodall will be talking with Dr. Ron Broglio, who is a professor of English, director of Desert Humanities, and associate director of the Institute of Humanities Research at ASU. His research focuses on how philosophy, art, and literature can help us rethink our relationship to the environment. Ron is best known for his essays and books on how non-humans create their worlds in relation to, or at odds with, human culture. His creative nonfiction book, Animal Revolution, will be published in March 2022. So please join me in welcoming Doctors Jane Goodall and Ron Broglio.
So welcome, Jane. Thank you for being here with us. And thank you for this wonderful and timely book. I want to welcome you to the Desert Southwest virtually. And I'm speaking from the ancestral territories of indigenous peoples, including the Akam Oram and the Peepash Indian communities. So thank you for your time with us today. This is a university setting, right? So I wanted to start with an education question. And as Ian wonderfully kind of covered a bit of your biography, prior to your formal education, you had field experience in Gombe, and you were working with the famous Louis Leakey, Dr. Leakey, the famous paleontologist. He chose you to do field work with chimpanzees because he trusted your instincts with animals, and because you didn't come with to observation with these pre-established expectations. For example, you broke some of the rules, perhaps without knowing it, right? By naming the chimpanzees, and you observed their emotions and personalities. And then later, when attending Cambridge, what the professors taught kind of conflicted with some of the things you saw in the field, right? So I was wondering if you could discuss that. And then how could universities be more flexible or nimble and respect life experience?
Well, I think I was really fortunate in my life. I'm speaking to you from the house where I grew up. And this is where I, was outside. There was no television when I was growing up. The world has changed technologically just so much. So what we're doing now, speaking from the UK to Arizona, was science fiction when I was young. But anyway, there we are, and no television. So I was out in the garden on the cliff top watching animals. I was born loving animals. And I was 10 when I dreamed of going to Africa, living with animals and writing books about them. Girls weren't scientists back then. Everybody laughed at me. How would I do that? We didn't have money. But my mother said, if you really want this, you're going to have to work really hard, take advantage of every opportunity. And if you don't give up, you may find a way. Well, I took that advice. I've given that advice to young people, especially in disadvantaged communities all around the world. And so many have said to me, Jane, I want to thank you because you taught me. Because you did it, I can do it too. That's a wonderful legacy of my mother. So anyhow, yes, I met Louis Leakey, and he was just really happy I hadn't been to college, which was just because I couldn't afford it. I would have otherwise. And I often wonder, if I had been to a university, would my natural way of thinking about animals have changed? I don't think so, because I've been with the chimps about 1.5 years when Leakey told me I had to get a degree, and there was no time, he said, to mess with an undergraduate degree. I've got you a place in Cambridge University, that's the UK Cambridge, to do a PhD in ethology. I didn't even know what ethology meant. No Googling in those days. We mostly communicated by handwriting letters. And if it was really important, a telegram, but it was very expensive. So, it was a bit shattered to be told I'd done everything wrong, But fortunately, I had a wonderful teacher when I was a child. I had not been to university, no, but the teacher you see behind me here, my dog, Rusty. I think I don't even know if the professors believed what they said when they said animals didn't have personalities, minds, or emotions, but they didn't know how to prove it. So therefore, it didn't exist. You couldn't study it. But anybody who's had a good relationship with a dog or a cat, a guinea pig, a rabbit, a horse, a bird, I don't care what it is, they know perfectly well we're not the only beings with personality, mind, and emotion. We're not the only sentient beings. And it's so exciting now for young people studying animal behavior. I'm sure I'm sure you've seen My Octopus Teacher, right? Yes. Well, we're going right the way from chimpanzees, apes, elephants, whales to birds, crows, and now the octopus. We're surrounded by as yet little known world, and I find it very, very exciting. So I think my experience coming in with an unbiased mind, perhaps that's something, that universities should think about. And I think it's even more important for education in schools. Children, especially young ones, need a chance for outdoor education to actually learn by seeing and asking questions and not just being given information, facts and facts and facts that they're probably not interested in. So, maybe we can one day have a discussion about that with a little group of professors from your university.
Be wonderful. No, thank you very much for that. And I think it really is inspiring. I was thinking about the role of culture as kind of an intergenerational passing on of non-biological traits, right? From one generation to the other. And one of the examples that you mentioned in the book is language. In fact, you say our mastery of language allowed us to teach about things that weren't present. We could pass on wisdom gleaned from success and mistakes of the past, right? I mean, this is one of the powers of writing and one of the powers of your book. And so I'm wondering, how do you see that happening today? And what are you passing on to us?
Well, what am I passing? I don't know that I'm passing it on to you there, but basically to the world at large. Yeah. We're going through pretty dark times right now, right? Politically, socially, environmentally. I mean, it's grimmer than it's been in my whole life since World War II. And I think a lot of the sort of hope and resilience that I have, and I've just been thinking about this recently, is because I grew up in World War II. And for a long time, Britain, supported only by the armed forces from the colonies, Canada, Australia, and so on. The rest of Europe was overrun. It either was defeated by Hitler's armies or it had capitulated, like the Vichy regime in France. And the Nazi army forces were so well equipped. We only had an air force that was any good at all. And I live on the south coast, and all we had protecting us from the might of Nazi Germany was a little bit of scaffolding along the sea and some barbed wire. That was it. But we had Churchill, and Churchill's speeches. He roused a spirit in England. We will not be defeated. We will not be defeated. And we weren't, amazingly. We managed to hold out thanks to our brave Air Force until America joined the war. So I think that's colored how I feel. That was a hopeless situation, but we overcame it. And I think the most important thing we can have now in this dark time is hope. Because if we don't have hope, then we give up. What's the point of doing anything if you don't hope that it's going to work? And when I talk about hope, it's not looking at the world through rose-tinted spectacles. I liken it now. It's not even in the book. I thought about it. We're in a dark tunnel, and right at the end is a little speck of light. That's hope. But we don't just sit at the end of our tunnel and hope that the light will come to us. No, we have to climb over, crawl under, work our way around all the obstacles between us and that little light. Then we get there. And that's what we've got to do, get together around the world. And I think universities have a major role to play because you've got young minds just before they go out in the world. And if they don't have hope, then we're doomed.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. It's really one of the things I really love about the book is how hope isn't, as you said, passive quality. It's really engaged, right? It's this making this effort. And one of the things you talk about actually really early on is you actually list out some elements of that set realistic goals, and then find pathways to achieve them, have confidence, and have support. I guess those are things that the universities can do as well, as provide some of that. And what I love about it is how process driven it is. It's not just sitting back, but there's a process to that. And it's really wonderful. The other thing that I liked is the book is broken down into 4 chapters: the human intellect that inspires hope, the resilience of nature, the power of young people, and then the indomitable human spirit. And in fact, you were speaking a little bit about the indomitable human spirit just a moment ago. We look at World War II now through history books, and so we kind of know the ending of the story.
Yeah.
But when you're in it, you don't know how it's going to end, and it does seem very dark, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And so you need those role models. And so I was wondering if you can talk about both some of the role models you had that helped you along. You mentioned Churchill. I think in the book you mentioned your grandfather. So some of those role models. And then, as Ian mentioned, you're a pioneering woman in what was a male field of natural history. And did you have women you could look to either as role models or as support?
Well, I was very lucky in my family. And my mother, my grandmother, my aunt, they were not only supportive, but role models in the way they tackled the problems that life brings up. There weren't really other women. I mean, I read about Florence Nightingale, but basically, it was my family and books. I read all the books I could, as there was no TV. I learned from books and nature. And so I think I got my inspiration from reading mostly fiction books. I mean, first of all, it was Dr. Dolittle. And actually, when you read Dr. Dolittle, there's an awful lot about animal behavior hidden in what he's talking about. And then it was Tarzan. Well, I knew there wasn't a Tarzan, but there he was out in the forest with these wild animals. That's what I wanted to do. And then there were adventure books by the early explorers going down the Amazon into the green hell, they called it. I wanted to go down the Amazon into that green hell and meet anacondas and fierce creatures. I was always attracted to that sort of thing. So my role models and heroes were mostly fictional or those early explorers. And of course, if we read those books now, they're pretty awful because there was lots of collecting of animals and killing them and fighting with strange beasts and, humans coming out victorious and, well, facing up to indigenous tribes and all that sort of thing. So, yeah, I mean, that's how my childhood was. And things are so different now. I mean, children have access to the whole internet. And it's a bit sad that there's so much stuff on the internet that isn't true and all this fake news going around. It's absurd, I think.
Yes. Well, one of the things that's actually really interesting about that, since you mentioned fiction, and also our access to so much language and so much different kinds of information or degrees of information on the internet. One of the things you talk about in the book, and the book is really filled with this, is stories, right? You say people are moved to action by stories. I really love that. And I was wondering if you could talk about the role that stories play either in the book or some in your own life.
Well, the reason I left Gombe and the chimps and the world that I loved best, the best years of my life, when I could be out in the rainforest, learn about the interconnection of all living things in the ecosystem, was when I helped organize a conference in 1986 to bring together, because by then there were 6 other chimp research sites, bring the people together, scientists. And it was really about chimp behavior. Like, does chimp behavior change from one environment to another? Is there something like culture? Now, you mentioned culture. But when I first mentioned culture, I was sort of shunned. I mean, there were a lot of times in a scientific gathering when people virtually turned their backs on me. I remember the first time I mentioned that a chimpanzee was actually learning from his experience and changing at that moment. I don't know why that was considered so terrible, but animals, this, ability to reason and so culture. Oh, but of course we know now that chimps do have culture. But anyway, so at that conference, I didn't decide to leave Gombe, but I changed. I just left. And one of the things that made me leave was, well, on the one hand, there was the deforestation and reduction in chimp numbers. And the other was the conditions in some captive research. And seeing our closest relatives, very social, highly intelligent, in 5 foot by 5 foot laboratory cages, there because their bodies are so like us, sharing 98.6 or even 7% of our DNA. So they could be infected with our diseases that other animals less like us couldn't be infected with. And that secretly filmed video, I mean, so shocked me. I knew I had to try and do something. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I had to go and see with my own eyes. And this is where the storytelling comes in, because the first lab I went into, I came out shattered. I was in there, and one of the chimps' name was Jojo. He'd been in there for about 15 years. He was a very handsome male in this little cage with the thick bars. And I was down on my elbow with my mask and everything, and thinking about the chimps at Gombe, their leafy nests and their companions and the grooming. Mm-hmm. And some tears trickled down. And Jojo reached out and gently wiped the tears away with his finger. And that's a story I tell that really helped people understand what it was like. And then when I came out of being shown this facility, it was the National Institute of Health, NIH facility, and I found that they brought the top brass of NIH on the animal behavior experiment thing. They were all sitting around a table, and I was sat there, and I was sitting there, and I suddenly realized they were all waiting for me to talk. So I said the first thing that came into my head, I imagine that you are all compassionate, sensitive people, and you all feel therefore much as I do. Well, they could hardly say they weren't sensitive and compassionate. So I then proceeded to tell them stories about the Gombe chimps and how they behaved and what their life was like. Because I've discovered through my long life that the only way to change people is when you reach the heart. And storytelling is a way to reach the heart. People aren't really swayed by statistics. I know science has to produce them, but that's, if you want to change somebody, that's not really the way to do it. They don't want to listen to arguments, and they don't want you pointing fingers at them and telling them they're cruel, bad people. And often it's ignorance. You have to give them the benefit of the doubt.
That's an incredible story. And it really reminds us that we move between data and affect. And the data can give us some information, but the affect can draw us in and put some sort of real flesh and life to that data. So yeah.
That's true. I mean, if you look at that first big book I did, The Chimpanzees of Gombe, Patterns of Behavior, everything in it, there's quite a lot of statistics and charts and, doing as well as we could. There was no computers back then. It was all typed. My thesis was anyway. So I put stories in. And I think it's the stories that really changed people and made more and more people want to come and work with the chimpanzees and the baboons for that matter.
Yes. Well, and then, the Great Ape Project that has one photographer just took a series of portraits of different apes.
Yeah.
And just to see the faces and the up close and that sense of a personality and what is going on in the mind, it's just amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, actually, this brings us to something else, because we were talking about the resilience of nature. And, as we've said, while humans have caused a lot of damage to animal habitats, you've given excellent examples in the book of people helping to save species from extinction. And your example there of really helping captive animals. And I was pleased to see, however, that you mentioned the breeding program of the California condor.
I knew you were going to say that.
Right? Exactly, which it flies here in the Grand Canyon and the Vermilion Cliffs. So I was really happy about that, and I've worked with condors some. So yeah, it's been really lovely. And so in such examples, it's not only nature fixing itself, but humans changing their behavior and helping. So I was wondering if you could just talk about that, of how we can help support the resilience from nature.
Well, I think the best example I go back to Gombe again and that conference. And, one half was the medical research lab. And by the way, all the chimps are out of medical research now, thanks to Francis Collins. But the other half was what was going on in Africa. And again, I felt I had to go and see it with my own eyes. So I got a bit of money together from the Geographic and managed to visit, I think it was 6 other field study sites, and learned a lot about the chimp problems, the bushmeat trade, the destruction of the forest, the contagion of human diseases, and so on. But I also learned about the plight of the people and the crippling poverty, lack of health and education facilities, the degradation of the land, the growing human population. And it came to a head when I flew over tiny Gombe. Gombe, went in 1960, was part of the great equatorial forest belt. When I flew over in the late 80s, it was just this little island of forest, and all around were bare hills. And there were more people living there than the land could support, too poor to buy food elsewhere, cutting down the trees, even on the steep slopes, not because they didn't realize this would lead to terrible erosion, which it did, but because they'd overused their farmland. It was infertile, and they were desperate to find some land to grow more food, even though, of course, forest land is fertile to start with, and then it loses its fertility quite quickly, or perhaps to make charcoal or sell timber. And, this is when it hit me. If we don't do something to help them improve their lives, make a livelihood without destroying the environment, we can't save chimps, forests, or anything else. And so that led to our Take Care or Tokari program, which is the JGI method of community-based conservation. It was kind of ahead of its time, but we won't go into all that now. Safe to say that it's been incredibly successful. And as we've introduced more and more ways of helping them to help themselves, including microcredit, scholarships to give girls a chance of secondary education, family planning information, really well received, because they can't afford anymore to educate 8 or 10 children. And even in these remote villages, they know education is a way out of poverty. Mm-hmm. So if you fly over Gombe now, you won't see bare hills. And we have an amazing scientist in geospatial technology, Dr. Lilian Pintea, and he introduced this cutting-edge technology. So the local people now in all the villages through Chimp Range in Tanzania, which is 104, they've learned to use smartphones to monitor the health of their forest reserves, which is where nearly all Tanzania's chimps live, unprotected. But now they understand that protecting the environment is not just for wildlife, it's for their own future. And so they've become our partners in conservation. And that program is now in 6 other African countries. So everywhere we're helping to restore the forests that were destroyed through necessity.
That's really, it's a powerful story as we talk about stories. And it also is a reminder that we're part of the ecology, that it's not separate, and so we have to invest in each other in order to think of that broader whole. I really appreciate that. And it reminds me of something that Donna Haraway, a cultural theorist, talks about, which is responsibility, which is the power of responding to one another. And I like in reading your book that you have this responsibility to Doug, who is, your interlocutor, and to others, to the humans and the non-humans. And you even mentioned in the book Beach, your beloved tree, and from childhood. Exactly, just out there. And it's a feeling of responding and care. And that really gives me hope, I think.
Yes, I think more and more people, they're beginning to understand. And really, I think this pandemic has helped people understand we do need a new relationship with the natural world and animals, because it's our disrespect of animals that led to the pandemic in the first place. We created conditions like in wildlife markets and factory farms that make it relatively easy for a pathogen to jump over from an animal to a human when it may start a new zoonotic disease like COVID-19, for example. And it's our disrespect of the environment that's led to climate change and loss of biodiversity. So having a different relationship to it, and that's why it's so important for children. Sometimes in the inner city, there's not much nature. We have to find a way of reconnecting with nature. And so many people live in a world where, they can't for a moment be separated from their cell phones, their smartphones. They've got to have it with them all the time. And you see them driving along in cars and looking at their cell phones. And we've got to somehow make our lives more balanced. And yes, we need that technology, but we also need nature. And it's been proved that time in nature is physically and mentally beneficial.
Yes, it was in fact one of the ways that you sort of regained a sort of sense of peace, and is being in nature. That's true for many of us. One of the things that I think natural history does, and certainly is true in your books as well, is it teaches us a way of seeing the world. And once you see that way, you can't unsee, you really want to engage. And I want to, maybe you can talk a bit about that. And first, I want to thank you for that, helping us see. And if you can talk about that, because it opens a world of wonder.
Yes, it really does. And that's why outdoor education is so important, especially for young children. And to watch the wonder as they, like I did as a child. But there was this little boy, he was about 3, I think, and he was watching, how a snail glides along the ground. And he was watching it, and he suddenly got up and he put the snail on the window pane and ran inside to watch it from underneath. I mean, that's the kind of wonder, that is so important. And when children learn to, enjoy nature, and they all do, they all love messing around. When you learn to love something, you want to protect it. And I think that's really, really important. So, we just have to find a way of regaining this. I mean, we've become so materialistic, and we've lost that spiritual connection to the natural world that the indigenous people have. They still have it. And there's a lot we can learn from them about their old cultural ways, some of which sadly are disappearing. But goodness, we've worked hard to destroy the cultures of indigenous people all around the world. And thank goodness it's having a bit of a comeback, because they can teach us a lot.
Yes. Well, speaking of, this is a wonderful segue. Since speaking of teaching, we have a few students who want to ask you a few questions. And Jane, first of all, thank you for your time with me in the dialogue. And so I'm going to introduce first Phoenix Nelson, who has a question. So, Phoenix.
Hi, my name is Phoenix. My major is applied math for life and social science. And I want to thank you so much again for being here today, speaking with us. I wanted to ask you, how do we have these important conversations of doing good by nature with people who may not see any problems with the state of the environment or do not want to invest in sustainable actions because it inconveniences them? Do we just need to have enough hope for the both of us?
Well, I think we have to try, as I was saying, we have to try and reach their hearts. And, when you talk to somebody, you don't always know if you've succeeded. So I'll tell you a little story. It's a story I love. I was in this taxi going to the airport, and it was a 20-minute drive. And the taxi driver had been told who I was. So he started on at me. Oh, you're like my sister. You're spending all your time with animals. That's just stupid. There's so many children and people living in poverty, and you're just wasting all your time on animals. Blah, blah, blah. So I got sat up and talked to him through the little gap, in the cab. I told him stories about Gombe. I told him about Takari. I told him about Roots and Shoots, how we're working with children, trying to improve lives in different parts of the world. And he just grunted and grunted and grunted. I told him stories about chimps helping each other, about my dog when I was a child. Grunt, grunt, grunt. Well, we got to the airport. Neither of us had any change. So I owed him, he owed me after I paid him money. He owed me probably the equivalent of $30 now, something like that. And so I said, I will give it to your sister as a donation, thinking, he'll go and drink up the proceeds with his friends in the pub, Well, I got back after 3 weeks and there was a letter from the sister. She said, first of all, I want to thank you for your donation. Secondly, what did you do to my brother? He's been to help me 3 evenings with my work in the shelter with the dogs and the cats. So it was just luck. If we hadn't had that business about not having change, I would never have known how much I changed him. So it's always worth trying, telling stories, trying to reach the heart. And then if you fail, and you've failed, well, you have to hope you can do better next time and say, well, what did I should have worked harder. I should have done something different, Try and blame yourself as not just the other person.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Jane. And now Bailey Shaw has a question for you. Bailey.
Hi, Dr. Goodall. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Bailey Shaw. I'm an elementary education major here at ASU. So your book does a phenomenal job of convincing its readers that having hope is a major part of driving the social change that we need. I'm curious about what specific actions you think we might undertake as college-age students navigating this really complex world. What do you think is the most important action or habit that young people like us can do to or change about our lives right now to create a more hopeful world and sort of share that sense of hope with others?
Well, one thing is please join Roots and Shoots, because that is changing lives all around the world. And, it began with 12 high school students in Tanzania, now in 65 countries, with young people from kindergarten, university, and beyond. More and more adults are forming groups, working to help people, animals, and the environment. And the main message of it is that each one of us makes some impact every day. And as long as we're not living in abject poverty, we can choose what sort of impact. What do we buy? How was it made? Did it harm the environment? Was it cruel to animals like factory farms? Is it cheap because of unfair wages paid to people, in other countries? And consumer pressure, as people get more educated, is truly beginning to change business. And as there's an unholy connection between big corporations and government, because so often big corporations kind of keep one of the political parties running, then if you start seeing change in business and less corruption, then you're going to see change spreading further and further. But one thing we can all do is move towards a plant-based diet. You don't have to suddenly give up meat, but I'm vegan now because it's easy here at home. My niece is a great cook, and she gets home from work and she cooks lovely vegan meals. But just eating less meat, because this factory farming of billions of animals is destroying the environment to grow the grain to feed them. Masses of fossil fuel used in the whole operation. Water in some places so scarce, parts of the US included, is being used to change vegetable to animal protein, and they're all producing methane gas, especially cattle. And the cattle ranching and grazing too is having a damaging effect. So it's people don't realize that it isn't just the tree-hugging animal lovers, although that's why I stopped eating meat, but it's actually the damaging effect on the environment that's being recognized more and more. But what you can do as students is look around. What do you care about? Think about what you can do to make a difference. You can't be everywhere doing everything. Concentrate on what matters to you, knowing that hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other students are concentrating on what matters to them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bailey. And now Jenna Schultz has a question. So.
Hello, my name is Jenna Schultz, and I'm an anthropology major here at ASU. I just wanted to say thank you so much for being here. My question refers to the part of the book where you discuss how you believe humans are clever and not wise, but that you believe nature is wise and that there's this untapped, powerful intelligence in it. So my question is, how do we begin to tap into this vault of knowledge? And then once we've done that, how do we implement it into our core systems? Thank you.
Well, I don't know how you implement it because I guess everyone's different. But for me, just being alone out in nature, for me, it's a forest. For other people, it's the sea. For other people, it's the grasslands. We all have a different part of the natural world that we love that gets to us. And when I'm out alone in the forest, I can't really explain it. If you're on your own, you can totally forget humanity. You're just part of it. As soon as you're with one other person, even somebody you love, it's different. You're a human being, two human beings in a forest world. But if you're on your own and part of it, that gives you something inside that you never lose. And you realize that, we are part of the natural world and we depend on it for everything, for clean air, for water, for food, even in the middle of a city. But, what we're depending on is healthy ecosystems. And if I take a forest ecosystem, I see it as like this beautiful tapestry of interconnected plants and animals, each one having a role to play. And if those animals or plants become extinct in that ecosystem, it's like pulling threads from the tapestry until it may hang in tatters. The ecosystem will collapse. So this is what we have to fight against. We have to fight to protect the little creatures that may seem insignificant. And there's a whole area that people don't think about very much, and that's that all of this so-called conventional farming is relying so heavily on chemical pesticides and herbicides. It's killing the soil. It's actually killing, and down there under our feet are all these microorganisms. We don't know anything about them much yet. And and I hear you're having Meg Lohman, Canopy Meg, coming to talk to you. And God, that life that she's discovered up in the canopy. We have wonderful talks about that and the walkways she's made. So that doesn't really answer your question, but find the part of nature that gets to you and immerse yourself in it. And then you'll know how to bring that into your life because it will come with you. You can't get rid of it once it's entered.
Thank you. That was a great answer.
Thank you for that. And now, Aaron Montelongo.
Yes. Hi, I'm Aaron Montelongo, and I'm a biological sciences major here at ASU. So in your book, you state the 4 greatest challenges to solving our most existential threats are to alleviate poverty, reduce unsustainable lifestyles, eliminate corruption, and face up to the problems that humans and our livestock bring about. So since we're currently facing issues like daunting issues such as like the 6th mass extinction with like our species and stuff, how my question is, how might scientific advancements and technologies have a place among those 4 challenges?
Well, I think technology, let's see, what are we? Well, it can certainly help us to lead a less damaging lifestyle, because there are ways that we can live which help us to reduce our own ecological footprint. I think science can definitely help in that area. Science can help alleviate poverty in many different ways. And once you start alleviating poverty and educate women, for example, in Tanzania, we now have we've built 2 labs, and the children who don't have that good an education, they come in and they have computers, and there are teachers around the world who donate their time to talk to these kids about, different things. This is where technology is helping to educate, and helping to educate, especially the girls, will help reduce family size and help the children to understand the importance of protecting the environment and ecosystems. Can science help eliminate corruption? I don't know, you tell me. I don't know how we eliminate corruption, except join Roots and Shoots, and I'm not saying that because I started it. I'm saying it because it's taken itself off. And in Tanzania, we have Roots and Shoots in the schools in every district. And why? Because the young people who've been part of the program in a gap year, for example, or when they can't get a job, they volunteer and they go out into the schools and they talk about Roots and Shoots. And they're all telling me it's changed my life. It's made me think differently. It's helped me understand my role in the natural world. And certainly technology can help there a great deal by bringing smartphones to these village monitors, so they monitor the health of their forest. And they're very proud, and they upload it into clouds when they get to somewhere where that's possible. And they're really proud of what they do, and they love looking at satellite maps. So this technology can work its way into just about everything.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Aaron. And now our next question is from, we have a question from a local student who represents the elementary and high school classes who are tuning into this event today. So a question from Leah Jensen.
Hi, Dr. Goodall. My name is Leah, and I'm a 3rd grader at Lone Mountain Elementary. Sometimes when I'm learning new things, I get discouraged when I don't succeed right away. How have you learned to stay hopeful while learning something new, even when it seems like you are failing?
Well, sometimes people go through problems when it's very, very difficult to have hope. And I can't offer ways of hope to people in all of these situations. But I think this feeling of, if I'm confronted by something really tough, and I have to watch a scene where animals are being really harmed and cruelly treated, and it makes me angry, but instead of yelling out at people, how dare you do that, I use that feeling of anger to force myself to try and find a way that we can put the problem right. And so, hope, it's difficult. How do you give hope to a child whose mother is dying of cancer? I don't know, except to say that well, I think death is not the end of everything. That's just something I feel, and other people may not agree. It doesn't matter. It's good for me. So when I lost my mother, it was a strong feeling that she was still around and that one day I would meet her again.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Listen, I've got a message for all of you. I've got a message for all of you kids out there. At the end of our Roots and Shoots meetings in Tanzania, the young people get together and they say, together we can, meaning we can change the world. And I said, yes, we can. We know how to do it, but will we? So now they say, together we can, together we will. So would you like to say that? Do you believe that? Come on then. 1, 2, 3. Together we can. Together we will. Let's do it again. Together we
Can. Together we
will. That's right. Well done.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, class, and thank you for that, Jane. Really, it's a hope that is also a striving and a doing. And I really, the message of hope that you spread, and certainly through the book as well, has been really powerful. So I want to thank you for that and your time with us today. And a few other thank yous. Thank you to Dean Jeffrey Cohen for his support, and to Kristen LaRue and Bruce Matsunaga for organizing this event. Additional thanks to Peter Jensen and Byron Echeverria from Macmillan Publishers, to Julie Ross and Ian Gilby of the ASU Institute for Human Origins in their partnership and support, and wishing you well on the consortium. And finally, we want to thank our incredible writing teachers who work tirelessly to help ASU students imagine a brighter future. So thank you all.
And I need to add some thanks too.
Yes.
I need to say that I couldn't do what I do if it wasn't for the Jane Goodall Institute staff and volunteers, because, you know, I think Susanna Name has helped to bring this me to you. And we have wonderful staff in 24 countries who are helping me to spread the message. And I want to just say thank you to all of them, and to my amazing family and my wonderful friends. I mean, we need that. We talked earlier about that support system. We all need that support system. We all need somebody that we can cry on their shoulder when we're really in a down mood, and we all get into down moods. We all need friends to raise a glass and say cheers when things go right. So thank you to all my friends and supporters and JGI staff and volunteers and Roots and Shoots, and all of you who were joining us today. Thank you and cheers.
Cheers. Thank you very much for this time.